Hi, my name is Marie Haynes, and I love using Google's Disavow tool. I know that seems like such a geeky thing to say. I've been disavowing links since the tool came out in 2013 and have used it many, many times to help a lot of websites recover. Over the years, I've had a lot of people ask me questions about how to use this tool because a lot of Google's documentation is a little bit controversial, maybe a little bit challenging to understand. So what I want to share with you today is a number of the questions that we get asked regularly about using Google's Disavow tool. We have removed penalties from hundreds of different websites, many of those being unnatural links penalties. When you get an unnatural links penalty, Google will actually send you examples a lot of the time of the links that they consider to be unnatural. And so we have quite a large database of what types of links Google can consider unnatural and a lot of experience to go behind that as well. So my hope here is that I've answered some of your questions when we do this presentation. We open this up to our Twitter audience. If you're following me on Twitter, it's Marie_Haynes on Twitter. And we asked for your top questions in regards to using the Disavow tool. And so in this episode, in this webinar, what we're going to do is share those questions with you, and I will share my thoughts on how to best use the Disavow tool, or even whether we should be using it. So let's just talk first of all about what the Disavow tool is. You can't even find the Disavow tool in Google Search Console. You have to actually search for it explicitly. So if you go to Google and type in Disavow tool, you'll find it. And Google actually did this on purpose. John Mueller from Google has told us that they wanted to make sure that people who are using the Disavow tool use it only if they know what they're doing. And Google actually says this in their documentation. They say that it can be challenging. This is when you go to upload a disavow file, what you'll see is this big warning that says only use this with caution. And if you use it incorrectly, it can potentially hurt your site's performance. And we have seen that happen. Now, in my experience, you need to really, really incorrectly use the Disavow tool for it to significantly hurt you. A lot of the time, a lot of the links that people are disavowing, Google's already just ignoring them, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on in this presentation. But I have seen some websites that have done very serious things in disavowing huge parts of their link profile that shouldn't have been disavowed. You may have heard about this experiment that Cyrus Shepard did several years ago, where he actually took his own website and disavowed every single link that he could find to the website. And you can see in this chart here that his traffic suffered as a result, and he never actually recovered this traffic. Now, there are some variables to discuss here, and I asked Cyrus a couple of years ago whether his traffic had recovered, and he said, well, actually, we aren't putting new content on the blog, which means that it might be challenging for that traffic to recover. But the point that I want you to take home here is that you need to be careful when you're using the Disavow tool. Cyrus was doing an experiment, obviously, but if you go and disavow a whole bunch of really good links pointing to your site, this can cause harm to your site. And the reason for that is that the Disavow tool, what it does is it tells Google, or at least asks Google, because Google does not have to pay attention to your Disavow tool. But essentially what it says is every site that's in your disavow, as Google crawls that site, they will stop counting the links that point to your site from there. So let's say some website called spammywebsite.com links to me, and I decide that I don't want Google to count that link when they're doing page rank calculations, or maybe making calculations about the trust that they have in the links pointing to our site. There's a lot of things we don't know about how that it works exactly. But let's say Google's doing a bunch of calculations, and I say, look, I don't want you to count this one link that's pointing to my site. I can put that link in a disavow file, or I can put that entire domain, which we'll talk about in a minute, in the disavow file. And what that means is when Google crawls any page on that website, if they find a link that's pointing to my website, they essentially treat it as a no-followed link, meaning that they're not going to count the page rank, they're not going to count it against me, they're also not going to count it for me. So if I had a really good link that was actually helping to boost my rankings and I decided to disavow it, then there's a good chance that it'll just get ignored. And this is what happened to Cyrus most likely when he disavowed all of the links pointing to his website. Before we get into some of the questions that you've sent me, because you sent me some really, really good questions, I do want to just tell you that we have a new product that is out. We have completely rewritten the guide to Unnatural Links Recovery, which is the book that I initially wrote back in 2013 to describe how I remove penalties from websites. Now I have a full team that works with me, and my head of manual actions, Dylan Adamek, has worked with me to rewrite this book so that it's appropriate for today. When I first wrote this book, it was before we even had the manual actions viewer in Google Search Console, and a lot has changed since then. So if you are struggling with getting a manual action removed, there will be a link in the description of this YouTube video on how you can buy this book, because it outlines much more than I'm talking about in this webinar. Outlines how to make decisions on certain links, how to create a spreadsheet, where to gather your links from, and how to use the disavow tool in thorough detail. Although this is written for people who have a manual action, it is perfectly good for those of you who are just trying to do a link audit because you feel that you're being suppressed algorithmically as well by Google. If you think that suppression is due to unnatural links. So let's talk first about who should be using the disavow tool. And there really are only a few reasons why you should use it. Not all of you who are watching this video will need to use the disavow tool. So the first thing that is the most obvious is if you have a manual action. And you will know if you have a manual action because you'll see it in Google Search Console. If you go in the left sidebar, you'll see a section that says security and manual actions. And if there is a manual action there, it means that you have we call it a Google penalty. They're not always penalizing. It's a bit confusing. I prefer to call it a manual action, although we do occasionally call it a Google penalty. If you see that you have a manual action for inbound unnatural links, in this section of Google Search Console, then yes, you need to be using the disavow tool. You first of all need to be trying to remove as many of those unnatural links as you can, but you probably need to be using the disavow tool as well. Now, what if you don't have a manual action? One of the other reasons to use the disavow tool is if you have a large number of unnatural links. And I know a lot of you are saying, well, what are unnatural links? We'll talk about that in a minute. But Google has said a couple of times, well, you really only need to use it if you have a manual action. So what about these websites that have tons of unnatural links, but have not actually received a manual action from Google? This was something I asked John Mueller about back a couple of years ago. And actually, it was probably about a year ago. I asked him whether a website could see improvement by disavowing even if they didn't have a manual action, and whether algorithmically disavowing could make a difference. And John said it could be, he said that can definitely be the case. So it's something where our algorithms, when we look at it and we see, oh, there's a bunch of really bad links here, then maybe they'll be a bit more cautious with regard to the links in general for the website. And we see this. We see websites that we look at them and we go, oh my gosh, how do you not have a manual action? You have been building links that go against Google's guidelines for years. And, and we think that this type of website that has a large number of unnatural links, that Google's algorithms can look at it and say, we're not really sure whether we can trust the links pointing to this website. And so maybe even some of your good links are not counting for their full potential right now. But then, just even more recently, John Mueller, I was privileged to be able to interview him. You can find that if you just Google Marie Haynes, John Mueller interview, you'll find it. And I asked John the same question again. Is it possible for a website to make a recovery, I don't think I said make a recovery, but to see improvement improvements algorithmically after using Google's Disavow tool. And at that point, John said, well, I think that would be very rare. So how do we rationalize this? Because for a couple of years, I actually did not offer link auditing and disavow work to people, even though they wanted to do it. Because Google had said to us, well, look, the new Penguin algorithm, it is just really good at ignoring unnatural links. And, you don't need to worry about it. It's kind of what they said, because Google's really good at ignoring links that could potentially cause problems. So why would we disavow? And the thing was, so for a couple of years, we didn't do any disavow work. And we had this company come to us that we looked at their link profile and said, well, listen, if you don't have a manual action, you're going to get one soon, because these links were really, really bad. They were mostly links in articles that were written kind of in the form of guest posting. They weren't all obviously guest posts, but they were articles that got spread around to multiple different websites and published. And these articles would have links pointing back to the client that were often keyword anchored. But these links were not natural mentions. I mean, these articles were either paid or they were content that was provided to a publisher, and the publisher was linking back not because they're recommending this company, but just because the links were there in the content. And if you do that on a big enough scale, that's against Google's guidelines. So this company came to us and wanted a disavow, and we said, in your situation, I think we should do it because there was just such a large scale. Now, this is a really interesting case because you can see that we filed this disavow. This was August of 2018. Now, this was 2 years after Penguin 4.0, where Google said they're just ignoring unnatural links. And, we went ahead and we did this very, very thorough disavow. I can't remember how many links we disavowed, but it was a very large number. And about 2 months later, you can see that the traffic started to improve. And just to get a sense of how much the traffic improved, here's the large picture for this website. And you can see that, they were struggling for many, many years. And then within 2 months of us filing a disavow, their traffic just took off. And every single update, they seem to do better and better. And so what does this mean? This is a really, really good case because in this situation, all we did for this website was file a disavow. We didn't improve on any technical work. We didn't clean up thin content. We didn't make any improvements around EAT. These are things that we wanted to do, but this company hired us just to do a link audit and a disavow. And they saw massive, massive improvements. Now, here's another company that we did a disavow for. And within a few weeks of filing this disavow, they saw massive, massive improvements. In this situation, though, we had also recommended some other things to improve on site quality. And it's really, really challenging often to say whether our disavow work has actually helped because it's rare that we do things in isolation. So if you do file a disavow and you think that it's going to help improve your traffic, you need to give it some time. In my experience, it can take anywhere from a couple of weeks to even a couple of months in order for a disavow to result in improvement, if it's going to result in improvement. And so I think some of that centers around how Google does link-related updates. I do think that there are times where Google doesn't tell us about this, but they push out an update because they've gotten better at finding links that help to promote rankings, but really shouldn't. So John Mueller says, really, there are 2 times when you should make use of the disavow tool. The first, he says, is if you look at the links to your site and you're pretty certain you're going to get a manual action. So if you have been buying links, then you probably should be auditing these. And the vast majority of links that you paid for are ones that I would be really, really worried about. Now, there are exceptions. There are, let's say I'm a wedding photographer and I pay for inclusion in a directory that is only for wedding photographers. This might be okay. I've done plenty of webinars and talks and articles about directory links. And if you Google my name plus directory links and whether to disavow, you'll find that information there. But yes, if you know that you've been involved in a history of building links that you would not want Google's web spam team to see, then you should be considering filing a disavow. But here's the other one. John said, if you're really unsure of what Google's algorithms will do, then maybe you should put a disavow file out. Now that's tricky. And this is the type of question that we get asked about a lot. If you see very ultra spammy links pointing at your website, I'm talking about spammy image sites or, these sites that have like 4,000 wallpaper images and one of them links back to your website. These are links that every website gets, and I really don't think that they're going to hurt a website. But let's say we're doing a link audit and we've decided to disavow a whole bunch of paid links or articles that contain keyword anchored links perhaps, and then we also see a bunch of spammy websites. Well, those are things that we'd add to the disavow tool, but I think that disavowing spammy links alone is not going to make a difference. I'm going to cover that a little bit more with one of the questions that we were asked, so I'll come back to that in a little bit. But really, here are 3 reasons to disavow. You have a manual action, you have enough links that you could get a manual action, or you have a whole bunch of spammy links. Another example of spammy links would be if you were hacked and you had a bunch of adult links, so a bunch of porn anchors, things like that. If you're seeing that, then we usually say, yeah, it's probably a good idea to disavow. But I still think in that case that in most situations, Google can recognize that it's not like you're all of a sudden wanting to rank for these adult terms, but rather this was something that somebody else did to your website. And that really shouldn't hurt you. But these are the 3 reasons why we would recommend filing a disavow, doing a very thorough link audit. Now, even after saying all this, if you're sitting there going, well, I don't know, I mean, maybe I have enough unnatural links that would cause a manual action. Maybe these links are good. Maybe they're not so good. If that's the case and you're really not sure, we do offer something at MHC that we call a link overview plan. And what this is to have, we have several of our team who are very skilled in auditing links. And for some of our team, that's all they do is audit links and also gather information on what it is that Google values or doesn't like in terms of link quality. So if you would like to have an MHC specialist take a look at your links and give their opinion on whether they're likely to hurt you, then this is a service that we offer. And if you do take us up on this service, now a good number of the sites that we do this service for, they actually don't need a link audit. And that is often what our conclusion is that, yeah, you've got a bunch of spammy links there, but we really don't feel that this is the type of link that is going to hurt you in Google's eyes. We created this link overview plan because we were starting to get people wanting to sign up for much more expensive link audits. And we felt, we would look at the site and go, gee, I don't think this is a good use of their money to spend thousands of dollars having us audit links when they're probably not hurting them. So if you're not sure whether you need a link audit, you can reach out to us at either the link that's here. We'll put this in the description, in the YouTube description as well. Okay, let's get on to the questions. So we asked you guys to send us questions either on Twitter or via our newsletter, and we had some really fantastic questions. Initially, I was going to include who asked each question, and then I realized in some cases you might want to actually stay anonymous. For a long time, I couldn't publish a testimonials section on my website because nobody ever wanted to be associated with Marie Haynes because it usually meant that you had a penalty of some sort. And so I'm going to keep the question askers anonymous as we do this part. Okay, so the first question is, which tools do you recommend for using and what purposes? When we do a link audit, the first thing that we want to do is gather links. And there's been a little bit of controversy over the last few years on whether we should be gathering links from third-party tools. So we get links from Moz, Majestic, from Ahrefs, and then also from Google Search Console. We use the links from Google Search Console. They'll give you the most recent and also a sample of links. And so we gather both of those. I've had some cases where we've struggled to remove a manual action. And what we actually have done is gone in every single day to get the sample links from Google Search Console. And sometimes you'll get a bunch of different links every day if you do that. But in most cases, probably looking at just Google Search Console links is enough. Google, when they're asked whether you need to use third-party tools for this type of thing, what they'll say is you really should have enough information in Google Search Console. But here's the thing. What they're talking about is you should have enough information to find the patterns. So let's say you hired this SEO company a few years ago and you realized that all they did for you was build comment blog spam. So basically the idea is you find websites that have a comment section that will provide followed links, and then you drop a comment in there and link back to your website. Now, using Google Search Console, if you're looking through all the links that they give you there, you're going to see enough of those to go, this is a pattern. We should be disavowing all those links that we made. The thing is, though, that's fine if you have a list of all of those links you made. But if you hired a company years ago and they didn't give you that list, then you're kind of stuck. And this is where we found that a tool like Ahrefs, Majestic, and Moz, they'll be able to fill the gaps in. And you really want to get as many links. Now, I know some people would say, well, if it's not in Google Search Console, then Google's not seeing it. And that's not necessarily true. What we see in Google Search Console is a sample of the links that Google sees. So you probably are fine with auditing your links in just Google Search Console. You probably don't need to pay for a tool to use to get these links. But if you want to be extremely thorough, and I would say if you're dealing with a manual action, then yes, you should get links from as many sources as possible. There are other sources you can use as well. I used to use Bing Webmaster Tools. I probably still should. I think it was a very good source. And another thing that we sometimes do is crawls of the web. That gets into a little bit too much detail that I want to get into now. But one case that we had was a site that had used forums for building links. And what we did was basically scrape the web to find mentions of this site on certain forums. That gets really intensive if you want to do that. And it's actually against Google's terms of service to be scraping Google. So we don't recommend doing that on a regular basis. If you have that detailed a penalty situation where you need to be digging deeply for links that you can't find on these other sources, then you probably need more professional help, like to hire us rather than to do this yourself. So now in terms of other tools, we have an internal tool, which I actually created, that creates a spreadsheet. And we also have our amazing Andrew, who is in charge of creating our spreadsheets too. And actually, if you want to have a spreadsheet created, that's probably something we can do for you. I mean, there would be a fee for that, but you can reach out to us again, help@mariehaynes.com, and we can create a spreadsheet for you to audit as well. But when it comes to actually doing the audit work, I do not like any of the tools that are out there. And we've had some relatively public disagreements with some of these tools, and I respect the people who created the tools. I think there are some incredible programmers and SEOs out there that I really do respect. But I do have to say that I'm not a fan of any tool which tells you which links to audit. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to make any enemies in this area. But if there is a tool that it's telling you this link is toxic, this link is potentially going to hurt you, do not take those suggestions at their face value. You need to be looking at these. I've seen tools. I had an article written years ago about a particular penalty that I wrote an article saying I could not remove this penalty, which was a big deal for me because I had a 100% success rate and still do for unnatural links penalties. And I couldn't get this one penalty lifted. And one of these link tools wrote this article about, well, here's why you didn't get the links, the penalty lifted. It's because our tool found all these links which you didn't disavow. Now, when we looked at these links that their tool found, they were links from the BBC, The Guardian. They were not the most favorable mentions of a company, but they were links that counted. And at that point, I think today maybe I would look at things a little bit differently, knowing EAT and how reputation is factored in. But back then, those were really, really good links. And if I had used a tool to tell me which links to audit, then I would have been disavowing some very good links. And you definitely don't want to do that. And so we did eventually get this penalty lifted. That's a whole story for another day. But it was not because we didn't use a link auditing tool. So if you're using a tool that tells you which links to audit, I think some of them can be good in terms of helping you to organize your links. Some of them will allow you to see, here's a list of one link from every domain that's linking to you, and here's our recommendations. Here's some metrics to use. I never, ever want to make decisions on auditing or on disavowing links based on arbitrary metrics. I had one client who disavowed every single link to her site, very similar to Cyrus Shepard. And this was because she relied on a tool that looked at toolbar PageRank. Toolbar PageRank has not been available for many years, and so every single domain came back as NA, which, according to this tool, was a link that needed to be disavowed. And so she disavowed her entire link profile and did serious harm to the site. It took several years to recover the site. Now, there were other issues with the site, so I don't think it was completely because of the disavow, but you need to be careful. One other tool I just realized I didn't put in the slide that we use, and I don't know if you can get it now, is a tool called Spam Flag. And what Spam Flag does is when you open up a page, I can basically put into the tool, all right, I'm working on mariehaynes.com, and every time I open a page, if there's a link pointing to mariehaynes.com, that link will be highlighted in the tool for me. Spam Flag used to be available through the Chrome Web Store. I don't know if it is now. I know we had to go through some sort of weird channels to get it, but it is something very helpful if you are doing a lot of link auditing. So that's something I like to use. Next question, when should you disavow on the URL level? This is a really good question, and I think people get confused about this because the screenshot that I used here is the documentation from Google. And it gives you, here's how you disavow individual pages. Here's how you disavow an individual domain. And so it sort of makes it sound like you really should be disavowing individual pages, but I'll tell you, you should almost never disavow individual pages. So you should almost always be disavowing on the domain level. And the reason for this is that it's rare that a link is just on one single page. Let's say you had an unnatural link in an article that got published on a site using WordPress as their CMS. And, that article got published, and so you disavowed that URL of the link where it got published. But that link could still exist on the author page, on the category page, on tag pages, on page 2, on / page 374. That link is going to be there. And so unless you disavow on the domain level, you're probably not going to get all the links that are pointing to your site from that site. So the only reasons to disavow on the URL level are where you had an unnatural link, but you really feel like you could get good links from this site in the future. This potentially could happen, like let's say you had an unnatural link on a news website and you paid for an ad that had a followed link, keyword anchored followed link, but yet that news site also covered your company in the news and gave you truly natural links. If that happened, you could disavow just the URL that your paid link is on, and then the rest of the links would still count. I'll tell you, it doesn't happen very often that I want to disavow on the URL level. And I've had a lot of problems with, another one of the reasons not to disavow on the URL level is that your disavow file can get too big. Nobody asked this question, but there's a max to how big the disavow file can be. It can't be more than 2 megabytes, I believe. And so if that's the case, if you have, every single URL as opposed to domains, you can fill that space up very, very quickly. And I have seen that happen. This was a question that was asked of one of my auditors, or maybe one of my auditors asked this. I'm not sure. How do I make my links look more natural? We get asked this a lot, and I'm laughing at this because if you have to make your links look natural, then they're not natural. And there are situations where you can ask for a link. That's totally fine. But when you're doing things that happen on a big scale, then you're probably not getting links that Google wants to count. So in most cases, if you're doing something where you're a little bit sketchy and you're thinking, well, I wouldn't want the web spam team to see this, then maybe you're not doing things the proper way. there's people who have talked about, well, you need to have a ratio of no followed links to followed links, and that will make it look natural in Google's eyes. I've never seen any proof to back that up, and I don't really subscribe to that theory as well. I've had other people say, well, you only need a certain percentage of keyword anchors in order for your links to be considered natural. Again, I don't think that that's true as well. So if you're trying to figure out how to make something that you've scaled look like a natural tactic, just know that Google's got like a team of very, very smart engineers that their main job is to find links that are artificially propping up rankings. So if it's working now, it's probably not going to work for a long time in the future. Is there a benefit to proactively disavowing? So we sort of covered this. I reused this screenshot of this client where all we did was just do a disavow. And in this case, we did the disavow because we felt that this site was at risk for getting a manual action. We have had several examples, and I didn't include all these screenshots, but we have over the years in newsletter. I'll talk about our newsletter in just a moment. But we've had many sites that we have helped, and they did not have a manual action, but they had enough links that we felt that it would be a good idea to disavow. And yes, in many cases, we have seen improvements in their rankings, again, within a couple of weeks to a couple of months of filing the disavow. So this is something where, so I think I've written an article, I didn't link to this from this presentation, but if you do a search for Marie Haynes Disavow Case Studies, you'll see that we've got a whole bunch that you can look at there, along with what sites actually saw improvements and what sites disavowed and did not see improvements, which is something that can happen from time to time as well. This was an interesting question that I do get asked several times. Can you block people from linking to you? So, and the answer here is no. Unfortunately, people are thinking, well, what if I do something in my robots.txt, or, can I exclude certain IP addresses? You can exclude IPs from seeing your website, but you can't exclude them from linking to your website. But in most cases, it shouldn't matter. The links that Google is really concerned about are the ones that you have made to try to improve your rankings. Now, let's say that, some horrible competitor is just, every day hitting your website with 500 ultra spammy comment links that you just don't want to have there. Well, Google's algorithms are pretty good at catching that kind of thing. And I've had a number of people that have said, well, I had a bunch of spammy links point to my website and then my rankings dropped. And every single time when I look at this, there's another explanation for the rankings to drop. Often the ranking drop was in conjunction with a core update, and we can say, well, look, you're actually lacking these elements of quality that Google was rewarding with this update. I really do not feel that negative SEO via link spam is possible. There are probably ways that you could do some very sophisticated paid link schemes that could work. I'm not going to get into those. I don't want to teach you how to negative SEO your competitors. But when it comes to ultra spammy links that you're like, listen, I just wish this site would stop linking to me, don't worry about it. Seriously, Google is very good at ignoring that type of link. For those with a budget and time constraints, what is the best way to monitor a link profile? So, good question, first of all, is should you be monitoring your link profile? Not everybody should. I think there's benefit, though, to monitoring your link profile. If you have the time to do it, I think you should probably every quarter or so just have a skim through your links, and look at the ones in Google Search Console. And maybe, if you use a tool like Ahrefs or Majestic or Moz, you can take a look at links sorted by keyword anchor, which is sometimes easier to suss out whether you've got unnatural links. But really, what you're trying to do when you do this quarterly link review is not necessarily audit links, but look at what's working. So what I would like to look at for most people is what links actually brought you traffic. What links actually made you business? And how do we get more of those links? Start thinking about, well, I got this mention in this news magazine because I wrote this fantastic study. Maybe I need to do more studies like this and get more links like that. So that's a really good reason to audit your links on a regular basis. But let's say you're one of these companies that you did have a problem with paid links in the past, or a competitor has been just throwing spam links at you, and you're not satisfied with sitting back and just trusting Google will take care of it. How often should you stay on top of your link profile? We have some customers that we recommend doing a monthly link audit for several months until we start seeing that the number of unnatural links is dropping down. And the reason for this is that the tools, all of those tools that I showed you, they only show us a tiny portion of the links that are out there. But Google sees, we think Google sees it all. And so you want to be checking in on a regular basis to see, are there new unnatural links that I need to be adding to my disavow file? And important point here, because this didn't come up as a question, if you're going to modify your disavow file, you want to make sure that you modify the file and upload whatever file you upload is going to overwrite what's currently there. So you don't just upload like, oh, here's 2 more links I want to add to the disavow. You've got to upload the entire disavow file again, plus those 2 links. I think another thing you can do is skim through. If you do subscribe to Ahrefs or Majestic or Moz, just skim through the links and see, are there any links there that look like I'm trying to manipulate my rankings? Now, I know that can be tricky if you're not used to looking at your link profile, but what I'm looking for is things where there's an article, that links out to really weird places like these casino websites and whatnot, and now they're also linking to us. If you see 1 or 2 of those, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you're seeing loads and loads of them, then that's one of those things where you start wondering, all right, even though Google says they're good at catching negative SEO, maybe I want to just be careful and throw these in a disavow file to be sure. This is one that I sort of touched on a bit before. So spam sites, there are so many. So this one that was asked was about the globe.net. And I'm sure you've seen, this comes up in pretty much every link audit we do. I think there's the globe.net, .org, .com. There's tons of them. And they're all just lists of links. So here's the question that you need to ask. In any situation, if you're trying to decide, should I disavow this link? Ask yourself, would Google think that I purposely created this link to improve my rankings? It's pretty clear that this is not the case for this site. And again, spammy websites that just link out to every site on the web, everybody has those links. And I see this a lot where if you've never looked at your link profile, or you've never looked at it in great detail, and then your traffic drops for whatever reason. Maybe there was a Google update and your traffic drops, and you start reading articles, and articles say, well, it's probably because you have unnatural links. And then you start looking at your link profile, you can see links that look like this, like the Globe and all these. There used to be, ms.biz or something. There was a directory that it was horrible because there would be thousands of copies of it, and trying to get those in the disavow file was just a real pain. If you're seeing those types of things, I guess you can add them to your disavow file, but you probably don't need to in most cases because every website has them. This is another question that we get asked a lot. How do you determine an algorithmic penalty? Now, I use the words algorithmic penalty here because this is what the question asked. Penalty. I wrote an article for Search Engine Watch years ago about whether we should be calling Penguin a penalty or a filter. And really, what does it matter, right? Google did something, they changed their algorithms, and now you're not ranking well. That seems like a penalty, whether you call it a penalty or not. I guess the question here is what we're trying to figure out is, how do you determine whether you're being algorithmically suppressed or you're being hindered from ranking because of the link profile pointing to your website? And this can be really hard. So this example that I gave here, I started in, I think, 2012, creating a list of every Google update or Google thing that happened that potentially could impact a site's traffic. And you can find that at mariehaynes.com/algo, ALGO. And this list is, we update it every time. I think our most recent stuff we put in it was September 21st. There was all this weird stuff with Google indexing, canonical issues, and weird stuff happening. And so the point of this list is to say, you could look at your traffic and say, all right, I had a drop on November 8th of 2019. And if you look at our algo update list, you can see that something happened on that day and whether it's connected to links or not. Now, I have to warn you that these are our best thoughts, but a lot of the time Google doesn't tell us whether it's, especially regarding links. They don't want to give us tons of information because the more they share about link quality and what causes a link to be considered unnatural, the easier it'll be for spammers to manipulate Google's rankings. So November 8th was an interesting one because we think it was connected to links, but I'm not convinced that disavowing actually would improve this. I feel like I should answer this, go a little bit further with this, because I know somebody who's watching this had a November 8th drop. I actually think November 8th, Google got better at determining whether links were actually recommendations of content. And a lot of the websites that saw drops on November 8th, they had articles that maybe ranked well because they had links pointing to them. But when you actually looked at the articles, they weren't the best of their kind. And so if you were involved in link roundups, in things where, a recipe site says, well, if you enjoyed this recipe, here's 5 more from my friends that you might like. Like, these are basically groups where everybody just links to everybody, kind of like a link wheel or a link party, that type of thing. Sounds like a fun party, right? And so if you were involved in that type of thing, then I don't think that I don't think we've seen any improvement from disavowing sites, because we've had a couple that have asked us to do a disavow with the November 8th drop. So maybe this was not the best example to use for this slide. But let's say you see a particular date on which the MHC team says, yes, we identified that a good number of our clients that we had marked as having link issues saw drops on this day. Or sometimes what we'll see is a good number of our clients that had filed a disavow saw improvements on this day. So if your drop coincides with something where our team has said, yes, we think Google did something link related, then that can mean that you're being suppressed by some type of action. Going back to this November 8th thing, because I think it's really confusing and I struggle to find a way to properly explain what I think happened here. I don't think that those links, like if you had links from roundups or, recommendations from link parties, basically, I don't think that those links are counted as negatives unless you have a massive number. If you've been spending years building up a link profile that is essentially just tricks to try to trick Google into ranking you better, then maybe there is some benefit in disavowing. But in a lot of cases, I think the way to recover from that type of hit is to find ways to actually truly get people to link to you that are recommending you, which is not always an easy thing. Let's see here. If bad links are ignored by Google and they were obtained without effort, is it worth the time to remove, request updates, or disavow them? So I think I've sort of touched on this a little bit before, but one of the things to consider here is scale. If you have a couple of unnatural links, maybe even they're paid links, I don't know if this question was talking about spammy links or links that actually did help to improve rankings. But let's say you had some paid links, but it's like 2 or 3. Should you disavow them? 2 or 3 paid links, probably Google is ignoring those. If you have hundreds of paid links, then Google's probably paying attention to those, or they could in the future. Some of the recent manual actions that we've done, that we've removed for websites, had thousands and thousands of links in the forms of guest posts and articles that were created in the guise of content marketing, essentially. And so, if you have that type of link on a large scale, then that is important. The other thing that that matters is intent. If you have a bunch of spammy links pointing to you that you never created and it wasn't there to help improve your rankings, they just happen, then probably you don't need to worry about that. But if you had a tactic that worked really well, like let's say you had a widget that invited people to link back when they embedded it, and it linked back with a keyword anchor then that's intent to rank for that keyword. And so that's something that I really would be paying attention to try to get those removed or disavowed. Getting links removed is really tricky. Back when I first started doing penalty work, we could often get people to remove a link by just sending them an email. And now that almost never happens. So I'm not going to go into great detail here, but essentially disavowing a link, in my opinion, is the same as getting it removed. I've written lots about this and included a bunch of quotes from Googlers on this. Google's documentation says if at all possible, you should remove unnatural links, but in many cases, it's not possible to do that. We get asked a lot about footer links. And so an example here would be somebody who creates websites, and then you have a link in your website footer for all of your clients that says website design by so-and-so. Or what we'll often see is, something that says Toronto web design by so-and-so, and the link is anchored with Toronto web design. I think you can understand that those are probably unnatural links. But what about, what if I said in the footer, site designed by MHC Inc., and I linked MHC Inc. back to my website? Is that an unnatural link? This is a situation where it depends, again, on scale and intent. I have an article that I wrote, and I've linked to it here from this slide. You can find it by searching for Marie Haynes footer links. It used to be number one, but it's been a while since we updated it, so it might be, who knows where it is. You'll find it. This article is basically everything up until a certain point that Google had said about footer links and whether they need to be no-followed. If you want to be technically safe, all your links in your footers like this should be no-followed. John Mueller has said that it's probably fine to have a brand anchor. Now, as long as your brand is not best web design in Toronto, if your brand is not keyword anchored, it may be fine to have followed links there. There are better ways to do it, though, and in this article that I've linked to here, I talk about how it's way better to have a link from actually within the content as opposed to in the footer. And so if you can get your clients to not just say like, web design by so-and-so, but to actually mention it somewhere in their site, that link can count for much, much more. So footer links are a tricky thing. I would not, if I had a web design company right now, I probably would include a no-followed link in my footer bios. But here's something interesting. One of the first, if you remember back, maybe you don't remember, back when Penguin first rolled out, there was a Penguin update about a month after the first rollout, and there was only one documented case that I've seen of a site recovering. And this was written about in Moz by Ross Hudgens, who wrote about WPMU.org. Now, this was a company that makes WordPress themes, and every theme that they put out had links in the footer that were keyword anchored for things that they wanted to rank for. And what they did was they went in and they removed a bunch of these anchors. I think they no-followed a bunch of these. They took down a bunch of websites. They did massive cleanup, and they saw almost a full recovery after doing this, which is really, really interesting. And so if you do have links in footers and you've been building them, that's been a link building tactic for you, I really would consider making some changes here. It's always a risk because maybe those links are helping you. But if you think about it, if Google's gotten good at figuring out which links are truly recommendations for your company, then, these really aren't recommendations. So you're sort of on thin ice here if you're trying to decide, if you're trying to keep these links and make them work for you to improve rankings. It's also worth noting, this came out of a podcast episode that Gary Ish was a part of a few years ago. And I thought this was really fascinating, where Gary talked about how internally Google has these labels on links, and they can see like, oh, this is a Penguin link, a penguinized link, a link that Penguin is ignoring, basically. Maybe this is a footer link, or this is a link that's been disavowed. And Gary recently said, I think this was in another podcast, something about how this is how the web spam team often can see whether you're working on removing links and cleaning up a link problem when you have an unnatural links penalty, because they can see if links that have been flagged as, for whatever reason, ones that they don't want to count, are also flagged with disavow, then they can see that we're trying to do some cleanup, and that's what can result in getting your manual action lifted. So something to keep in mind here is that if all of your links are of one particular type, it's very easy for Google to see that and maybe decide like, oh, I don't want to count this. So let's say you're, again, a web design company, and you've got, 100 different footers out there that are linking back to you from the footer, websites out there linking back to you from the footer. And that's the only type of link that you have. In that situation, it would probably be pretty easy for Google's algorithms to decide that maybe this isn't a natural thing. Maybe you shouldn't be the first recommendation when it comes to web design in Toronto. But if you also, let's say you had those 100 links coming from footers, but you also had 800 links from other sources that really did look like recommendations, then it's possible that those footer links could count for more. That's a little bit of theory on my part, but you never really want to overdo it with one link building tactic. Here's another very interesting question. What would you do on a new domain before or after you buy it? Would you check to see if it has spammy links? So I actually was involved as an expert witness in a court case where this was an issue, and it was a very serious issue that one business bought another business. They acquired a business, and they didn't do diligence into looking into whether that business had issues with Google. And so one of the things that business wishes they had done was to request access to Google Search Console. If it's at all possible when you're buying a new domain, assuming that the domain has been owned in the past, is to get Google Search Console access. And if the site has a manual action, you'll see it there in Google Search Console. But in the real world, that doesn't happen very often. And so if you were buying a site and you looked at the link profile, so you can look at that. I mean, obviously, if you don't have Search Console, you can't use that to see the links. But let's say you looked it up in Ahrefs and you saw that there were loads of keyword anchored links and loads of like articles and things that were very clearly paid links. I would be really cautious in buying this domain. Now, you could just go in and disavow all of those links, and there's a good possibility that it'll work, and it'll remove any doubt or suspicion that Google has regarding that site. But I would not, there's so much uncertainty about how Google handles this type of link that I would be really careful about buying that type of domain just yet. Now, maybe if the domain had ranked successfully in the past, then it would be something that I would consider. In regards to, how many links make it so that I would never want to buy this, it really is a case-by-case situation. If a site has, and I have bought a couple of domains that had some not-so-good links. One good example is my own website, actually. There's a Marie Haynes who is a writer of erotic romance novels. Not me. I keep trying to tell my staff that is not me, and some of them are not believing me, but there is another Marie Haynes, and she owned mariehaynes.com, and I was going to buy it from her, and then she let it expire. That's a whole other story. And then a domain snapper bought it up, and I ended up paying $500 for it. But I was going to give her like $5,000 for this domain, and she let it expire. Now, it had a very small handful of adult links pointing to it. I could have gone in and disavowed those, but I didn't. But let's say that this previous Marie Haynes had been doing some link building and had 1,000 links from adult websites. I still probably would have bought the domain and disavowed all of those. But let's say, this is kind of a very dumb situation, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say that Marie Haynes was also an SEO, and that she had a bunch of links pointing to the site that were anchored with best SEO agency, or, they were clearly unnatural links that were trying to boost the site for SEO related terms. I would probably not have bought the domain if that was the case. But I still think I could have bought it and it would have performed just fine. So there's a lot of things we don't know. And sometimes, if you're not sure, that's something that you could hire a professional like us to help you make that decision as well. Would you ever disavow a no-followed link? So this is something that's asked a lot as well. And Matt Cutts, who used to be the head of web spam at Google, years ago, he said there's theoretically a possibility that a website could get an unnatural links penalty because of no-followed links. And his example was if you had been relentlessly spamming comment sections all across the web and Google wanted you to stop doing that, they might give you a manual action for that. I've never seen that happen. I really don't think that's the case. And John has said multiple times that there's really no point in disavowing a no-followed link. Now, keep in mind, however, that sites can link out in multiple ways. And so just because, if a site links to you, if I was doing a link audit and there was a link in my spreadsheet that was really clearly unnatural, but it was no-followed, I might just throw it in the disavow file just in case. But often what we'll do is just ignore all of the no-followed links before we move on. So no, you do not need to disavow a no-followed link. I think that's it for questions. So again, I wanted to let you know that we have this book that is written, and it was originally written in 2013 and we've spent so much time updating this book. Dylan has worked tirelessly on this because there's a lot of information on removing a manual action. I think I might be a little bit boasting in saying this, but I think that most companies that do work to remove manual actions do their work based on this book, on the original version of this book. And we have, again, since updated it with helping you make decisions on which links to disavow, helping you answer even more questions than I've answered in this time that we had for a webinar. And if you want to hire us to look at your links, to do a disavow, or to also do the other side of what we do really well, which is look at site quality and help you find as many ways as you can to improve your website in ways that Google seems to reward or has told us that they'll reward, then you can reach out to us at help@mariehaynes.com, or you can subscribe to our newsletter. Our newsletter is something that we have almost 8,000 subscribers now, and every week we give you over 5,000 words of information on how to improve your SEO, what's new in SEO, what Google's doing with their updates, and all sorts of things. I think that's enough for me. I want to thank you for sitting through this webinar, and I hope that you've learned stuff from it. I'm going to do my best to answer questions in the comments section, so if you have a question, then throw it in there, and we'll see what we can do. And I really hope that this has helped you, because this is a very tricky subject. So thanks so much for listening, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.